Welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and today I'm doing the mid-year freak out book tag. I love doing this tag every single year. I've done it every year on my channel because it's so fun to check in halfway through the year, see how the year is going, share books that you loved, maybe books that you didn't love, and I think that this tag has a wide range of questions in terms of all of those things. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions. Question number one is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? And I don't know if I can narrow it down to one. As I was scrolling back through my books, I've read a lot of really good books this year, but I haven't read a ton of books that are new favorites, but I do have a few. The first one of those is Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. I have talked about this book so much. I absolutely loved it. It's my third George Eliot that I've read, and it is just, oh, I just love how George Eliot writes anyways. Her prose is just really, really, really beautiful. But in addition to that, I feel like she writes very real characters who are very flawed. And it's really interesting because that's not something that I commonly see in a lot of Victorian classics. A lot of them have really good guys and really bad guys. And I feel like George Eliot writes characters who feel like they're real people, that they have good qualities and bad qualities as well. I did a whole big long vlog on my experience reading Daniel Deronda, so I'll link that in case you want to check it out for more thoughts. Another favorite is middle grade. I had a couple of really good books that I read during middle grade March this year, which was incredible because last year middle grade March was a complete dud. So this year I read The Labors of Hercules Beale by Gary D. Schmidt, who is the author of The Wednesday Wars, which is one of my favorite middle grades of all time, which I also reread this year with my daughter. So I've read two of his books already this year, and oh my goodness, The Labors of Hercules Beale was so good. It had so many of the things that I really loved in The Wednesday Wars in terms of literary references. In this case, rather than it being Shakespeare, it was Greek mythology, and there's so much humor in it and so much heart. And we follow a young boy who has tragically lost both his parents in a car accident and is starting at a new school. So there's a lot of change and a lot of emotional growth that happens throughout the book, and it's just wonderful. Lastly, I'm going to mention a book that I finished recently last month, and that is My Antonia by Willa K. Everything I read by Willa K is just like a dream come true. I just love her writing so much. This is a book that doesn't have much of a plot, but it does follow two young children who are moving to the Nebraskan prairie, them growing up, and then them just kind of like learning about the world, learning about what constitutes family, roots, community, what does home really mean, how does home really shape your life. And so it has much more to do with like the nature writing and the themes that Cather tackles than the actual story itself that I love. Question number two is, what is the best sequel you've read this year? I haven't read a whole lot of sequels, so I will say I have read quite a few volumes of Attack on Titan. I think I'm through volume 12 at this point, and I'm really enjoying that series. Some of the sequels have been better than others. Some of them have been 5 stars. I think that volumes like 8, 9, and 10 were all like incredible. So I really loved those. And then the other series I've continued on in so far this year has been The Memoirs of Lady Trent by Marie Brennan, and I've read books 2 and 3 of that. Didn't really like book 2 all that much, but I really did like book 3, which is The Voyage of the Basilisk. Still not as good as A Natural History of Dragons for me. So far, book 1 is by far the strongest book of the series. Question number 3 is, what is a new release you haven't read yet, but you want to? And if you know me, you know I'm not great at following new releases, and I really wish that I was better about that, but I usually tend to let the dust settle a little bit before I get super hyped about new releases, because there's so many new releases all the time that people get excited about, and I tend to like wait a year or two before I read them. But there is one new release that I did buy from an author who is an auto-buy author for me that I absolutely love, and that is Son of Bitter Glass by KB Hoyle. KB Hoyle is a middle grade and YA author who is currently writing under the umbrella of Owl's Nest Publishing, which is an indie pub house that I've talked about, I think, quite a bit on my channel. They're a really small indie pub house specifically for middle grade and YA books that feel appropriate for that age range, which I absolutely love, because I think that there's a lot of books that are marketed as YA and I don't think that they're very appropriate for teenagers a lot of times. And I think that Owl's Nest really tries to put forth books that are appropriate even for the younger end of YA. So Son of Bitter Glass is part of a fairy tale retelling series that Katie Hoyle is currently writing. Book 3 is coming out this fall. I don't think they're interconnected. I've read Son of the Deep, which is a gender-bent Little Mermaid, and then Son of Bitter Glass is a retelling of The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, which kind of came to fame a little bit because Frozen is very, 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 very loosely based on that. So I am really interested in reading that one, and I have it on my shelves. I just haven't gotten to it yet. Question number 4 is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? I do actually have an answer for this, and that is Wind and Truth, which is book 5 of the Stormlight Archives. It's coming out in December, so it will be the very, very end of this year. But I did finish the 4th Stormlight book in January. So I'm eagerly awaiting that, and in the meantime, I am keeping myself busy with a reread of Mistborn Era 1, which you have probably seen my Mist Along announcement, but I'll link that in case you haven't seen it. So we're reading Era 1 and then we're gonna read Era 2, which I've not yet read. So I'm really excited about that. And by the time we finish all that, the new Stormlight book will be out and I'm so excited. Question number 5 is, what is your biggest disappointment of the year so far? And I have a few. So I think honestly, the book that I was probably the most disappointed in was Oblomov by Ivan Goncharov. And this wasn't a terrible book, but I was really, really excited to read it. It's about a man who is just like super lazy, and the back of the book is so funny, and that's why I picked it up. It's a Russian classic, and I was so excited after reading the back of the book. But the book itself is just very, very long for what it's trying to do. The entire book is just trying to make a point, which is not uncommon in Russian literature, but I think it's much more effective when it ends up being shorter, because Oblomov didn't have the psychological or philosophical depth that Tolstoy or Dostoevsky brings to the table. It felt more like an easy read, an enjoyable read, kind of like the one Turgenev I've read. And Turgenev's Fathers and Sons, I think, is under 200 pages or around 200 pages. And if Oblomov had been that length, I think it would have been punchier and I think it would have been more enjoyable. But because it's over 500 pages, it just dragged and I was ready for it to be over. Another huge disappointment was The Inheritance by Louisa May Alcott. I hosted Alcott in April, as you probably could tell from the title of the readathon. And it was a readathon to celebrate Louisa May Alcott and her works. And we decided that our group read was going to be The Inheritance. And then we did a group watch along of the movie. And I thought that the book was utterly disappointing. I think I was the only co-host who felt that way. Like, I gave it like 2 stars, 2.5 stars, something like that. Just really, I was very bored by it. I think that all of the characters felt like cardboard cutouts and were so flat, and the prose itself was decent, but I didn't like anything about it really very much. It felt like it was really derivative of a lot of different works. However, Louisa May Alcott wrote this book when she was 16 years old. It was her first completed novel, and it was not published in her lifetime. And I can see why. I don't think it was worthy of being published in her lifetime, probably, compared to some of her other works. But, you know, I couldn't have written anything that good when I was 16, so it's still impressive in that right. I'm still glad I read it, but I was really hoping I would enjoy it, and I was just kind of waiting for it to be over. Question number 6 is, what is your biggest surprise? And I would have to say What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a horror, you guys. I don't read a lot of horror, in case you haven't noticed. I mean, I read Attack on Titan, and that's about it. But horror is not my genre. I tend to be kind of sensitive to scary things, and I really don't enjoy supernatural horror. And so I tend to not go too near horror in general. But this was a book that was actually recommended to me by patrons, and I did a spoilery vlog for them on my thoughts on it. And the reason I was interested in it is, first of all, because everyone seems to love T. Kingfisher, and secondly, because this is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which just happens to be one of my favorites of his. And so I read it and reread The Fall of the House of Usher right afterwards. And this book is like, incredible. Like, I loved it so, so, so much. I think T. Kingfisher's writing is so immersive, and she puts a lot of humor in her books. I've since read a couple more of her books, and she interjects a lot of humor that kind of breaks up the horror element a little bit. I feel like her characterization is really, really good, and I really appreciated that as well. And I loved everything about this book. I'm also going to interject in here that another big surprise for me is how much nonfiction I've read this year so far. I have read a lot of biographies and memoirs this year, and I am loving them, like absolutely loving them. And it's really fun to be delving into a genre that typically hasn't held a ton of interest for me up to this point. I've always wanted to get into it and tried and had a book here or there that I've liked, but overall have had a hard time actually finishing some of the historical nonfiction that I've started. At this point, if I don't have a nonfiction, like historical nonfiction on the go, I want one on the go. So that has been a really fun change and something that I've been really surprised by. Number 7 is a favorite new author. This could be a debut author or a new to you author. So I've already mentioned T. Kingfisher. I have read 3 of her books so far and just absolutely love her writing style so much. None of them have held up to the level of What Moves the Dead, but I have also read the sequel to that one, which I think is what, Feasts at Night. And then I also read Nettle and Bone, which is like a dark fairy tale. And I enjoyed both of those. I love her writing so much. So I don't want to be repetitive, but T. Kingfisher is definitely one of those. And then I also read an Oliver Goldsmith book for the very first time. And Oliver Goldsmith, I think, predates Regency time period by just a little bit. And I read The Vicar of Wakefield for Feb Regency this year, and I loved that book so much. There were things about the ending that were just a little bit too neat and tidy and cliche and unsatisfying. So it didn't get like a full perfect 5 stars for me, but his writing was so incredible and I want to read more Oliver Goldsmith. Question number 8 is newest fictional crush. And I'm not someone who really crushes on literary characters or movie characters or fictional characters or celebrities. So I don't really have a good answer for this. I have seen some people say that instead of a fictional crush, what is a new favorite relationship that you have seen? And I don't know if I have that many like really deep relationships that I loved in this book, but I really did enjoy the romantic element of like the conclusion of Daniel Deronda. I think that I really appreciated how all of that story ended up, and I think it has one of the most romantic proposal scenes that I have seen in any book. And if you know me, you know that I'm not very big into romance. So for me to say that I love this proposal scene really says a lot. Question number 9 is, who is your newest favorite character? And I'm gonna have to say Razaki from the short story Neighbor Razaki by Willa K. I read her short story collection, 5 stories, and oh my gosh, I loved that whole story, Neighbor Razaki, but the title character there, he's just such a wonderful man, and we get like his current behavior, the way that he is with his family, and then we also get like his backstory, how he ended up in the Nebraskan prairies, and just his thoughts and feelings and philosophy on life and how he treats other people. And I just love him so much. Question number 10 is a book that made you cry. So I'm gonna sound really repetitive, but the only 2 books that have made me cry this year have been Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. The ending was so beautiful that it made me cry. And then also The Labors of Hercules Beale made me cry more times than I can count, honestly, probably at least half a dozen times. Question number 11, a book that made you happy. I have done a lot of rereading this year, and I think the books that have made me the most happy upon reread have been the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I read with my Patreon earlier this year. And oh my goodness, everything about that was a delight. Actually, now that I think about it, Return of the King made me cry also. So I guess there's another book that made me cry. And then a book that was not a reread that made me really happy was Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury, which I finished earlier this month. And there are moments of this book that are not happy, but so much of this just encapsulates childhood in such a beautiful way, and it is just like such a perfect book to kick off summer. And I was so happy when reading most of this book. Question number 12 is, what is the most beautiful book that you've bought this year? And I haven't bought a lot of very pretty books. I actually haven't done a ton of book shopping in general, but I love the cover of this book, so I'm gonna share that, and that's The Shepherd's Life by James Rebank. I just love the countryside in this. This is, I think, written by a shepherd who lives in the English countryside, and it's his reflections on his life. And this is actually, I purchased this for my in-person book club. We're reading this in November, I think, for NonFiction November. So I'm really looking forward to reading this one, but I love, love, love the picture on the cover. Question number 13 is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? A lot. I have still quite a few of the classics on my classics TBR to read, which is totally fine because I actually scheduled those books out one per month. And so far I have read each of those books in the month that I have scheduled to read them. So I'm really happy with how that goal is turning out. And there are some books that I'm really, really excited to read on that list. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is one of those. I'm really, really excited to read that one. And then a book that's not on that list is Kristen Lavrenstatter by Sigrid Undset, and I'm really excited to read that later this year with my friend Dia. I'm also working my way through my Read or Rid project, and that has not been a very successful endeavor. There's a lot of books that I haven't read, or that I've only read a couple of pages or a chapter or two and just been like, So I'm not doing great on that. So there's a lot of books on that I need to still read as well. Well, that's it for this tag. I would love to hear your answers below if you would like to chime in on any of these, especially books that have been like favorite books or biggest surprise or biggest disappointment. I always love to hear what you guys are reading and enjoying, or I guess the biggest disappointment is not enjoying. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.